Um, well, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the first CAR webinar series of 2021. On behalf of CAR, I would like to thank everyone for joining us today. I also would like to thank Professor Susan Thompson for accepting our invitation and presenting in our seminar today. Before we start, I would like to mention that we are recording the webinar. The presentation is for 40 minutes and we have 15 minutes answering questions. Please make sure your mics are off if you are not speaking today. And during the seminar, if there is any question, please write it down into the chat box and then I will pass them to Professor Thompson. We have 15 minutes for discussions around the topic. First, I would like to start with an introduction to Professor Thompson. Susan Thompson is Professor of Planning, School of Built Environment at UNSW and leads the City Wellbeing Program in City Futures Research Center. Susan is one of the first planners in Australia to advocate for the importance of healthy planning, making significant contributions to the field. Thank you very much, Professor Thompson, and the stage is all yours.
Well, thank you very much, Masan, for that very warm welcome, and it's a great privilege to be presenting to you today. I'm just going to share my screen. So, can everyone see that?
Yes.
That's
yes.
Good. Okay, great. Well, today I wish to pay my respects to the traditional owners of our ancient continent. And I'm speaking to you on the border of the Wongal and Gadigal tribal lands of the Eora Nation. And I proudly show this beautiful mural, which is just down the road from where I'm sitting right now. And for me, this is testament to the traditional owners' stewardship of place. A stunning reminder of their 60,000-year legacy as the oldest living culture on Earth. And because my talk very much today is around place, I think it's very fitting that I begin by showing you that beautiful mural. And I hope you enjoy looking at that as much as I do, and often go down and walk along the Greenway, which is just by this amazing piece of public art. Well, today I'm going to give a pretty broad-ranging talk, and I hope you'll find it at very least interesting, and I hope you can see some synergies with your work and the sort of broader remit that perhaps I'm proposing here in relation to how do we create a health supportive environment, and particularly from my perspective as an urban planner. So I'm just going to start very briefly with a few points about issues to do with our health, and pretty much I think you will all know what is wrong with our health, broadly speaking, and I'm not going to be talking about COVID, certainly not in the initial stages. And then I'm going to drill down into specific ways that the built environment can support health for people and for the planet, because ultimately without a healthy planet we have nothing, we have no life and no chance of supporting any health of any life on our planet. Then I'm going to pose some challenges and opportunities that planners face in delivering such an environment, and wrapping up with what I hope will be some optimistic notes about how we go forward, particularly thinking about the implications of COVID and what we've been going through in the last year or so. So let's think about issues to do with health for both people and the planet. The Australian government has an institute called Australian Institute of Health and Welfare. Some of you may be well aware of this, but just thought it was useful to point out to you that this institute offers an amazing array of data on people's health status, and it's a very useful go-to when you're wanting to look up information about people's health. And increasingly, there's a very big focus from the AIHW on the built environment's role in supporting and hindering people's health. Well, life expectancy is growing, and that's been a trend now for, well, pretty much the last century plus. And as I get older, I often say to my students, well, if we were back in 1886, I wouldn't be here. I won't think about where I would be, but it's quite, I think, remarkable and just something to reflect upon, maybe something we don't think about that much, but that we are living so much longer and for many, many more years out of disability, which is really the whole aim of my work, is to ensure that people live long, healthy, happy lives, not with any disability. It's not about increasing life expectancy per se, but it's about increasing the years of healthy living. Now, principally, we die of things that we don't catch from each other, although we've certainly had an enormous focus on communicable diseases in the last 12, 18 months. But these are the things that we typically die of now, and I'm sure you're well aware of these things. Heart disease and dementia are the two biggest killers of us, men in relation to heart disease and women in relation to dementia and Alzheimer's disease, and other related diseases. Also thinking about diabetes being a very, very problematic disease, and many of the cancers. And I think really interestingly, and sort of making that bridge to perhaps transport, thinking about transport provision, so much of the disease burden in relation to these non-communicable diseases is about insufficient physical activity. So if we were all in a room together, and I guess you can do this wherever you are now, I'd say, right, everyone stand up and start to think about how insufficiently physically active we are every day, and very much associated with our sedentary lifestyles. So dementia and coronary heart disease, the two biggest killers, have enormous disease burden associated with insufficient physical activity. And this is just WHO, World Health Organization, review of cognitive decline and dementia. And through this major review that they did, they found that physical inactivity was the biggest risk factor for cognitive decline and dementia. So it is a worldwide problem and well understood in the literature. We've now reached a point where global physical inactivity is more of a problem globally than smoking. Australia's done marvellously in reducing and, well, not quite eliminating, we've got to get to that point, but certainly reducing massively smoking rates. But globally, that's not so much the case. But I think just this graph really focuses so strongly on the importance of physical activity and how much that contributes to the disease burden. I just also wanted to point this out in my very, very brief little overview of health issues. The work that we do in healthy built environments is very much about physical health and mental health. And of course, they are closely interlinked. And it's not just about older people who might be feeling lonely, anxious, depressed. It's very much, as this report on Australian loneliness found, that it's very much a part of young people's experience and a big concern in terms of their mental health. And if we can say there's some good things that have come out of COVID, I think it is the appreciation of the importance of mental health and the importance of being socially connected with each other, and how this is so instrumental to good mental health. In terms of our health and the contributors to what's good health, there's so much more than just who we are in terms of our genetic makeup, our personal physical characteristics. This diagram, it's quite a famous diagram for planners working in this area, from Hugh Barton and Marcus Grant, colleagues of mine over in the UK. And this just sort of really shows you, hopefully, something that you might well come back to. It's a little bit perhaps complex when you first see it, but really what this diagram is doing is showing all of the different determinants of our health that are so much more and beyond our individual control. So some aspects of lifestyle are within our control, but not if our built environment and our natural environment doesn't allow us to engage in health supportive lifestyles. And this diagram importantly goes right out to the global ecosystem, thinking about climate stability and biodiversity, and previous determinants of health perhaps didn't sort of encompass that quite so strongly. So I encourage you to have a look at this, the settlement map, as they call it, and the ways in which all of these different aspects of our lives contribute to our health. Perhaps in a nutshell, you could say that so much of this is to do with a sedentary lifestyle, and from the sedentary lifestyle, key risk factors are obesity, physical inactivity, social isolation, that are contributors to the major chronic non-communicable diseases that plague our globe. And it is a global problem, and the sorts of diseases that you're no doubt well aware of. And let's just think about, certainly we've made huge gains in our health, and that's very much related to our life expectancy. But the question being, have we done this at the expense of our planet? And this is a really great quote from The Lancet. And I also often reflect to my students as a planner, when I first started out in planning, for somebody to say, oh, you'll be reading the Lancet journal, the most famous, or one of the most famous medical journals, a planner reading the Lancet, and now we're regularly reading the Lancet. So really just pointing out how interdisciplinarity has really blossomed in such a relatively short time, that we're doing things like that. And I think it's just worth reflecting and thinking about that. So this quote just coming out, thinking about how we have made these amazing gains in human civilization, but this now obviously risking the degradation of nature's very life support system going into the future. And I think only this morning there was a new report talking about biodiversity and risks of very sensitive ecosystems in various environments. Very depressing stuff. And these were the images, and this was the focus that we had a little more than 12 months ago in Sydney. This is just images that that I was aware of in my own neighbourhood. The choking smoke from the bushfires, the dry, crunchy grass under my feet, the drought writ large across our nation, and then a reversal with floods coming down. And this is actually not that far from the image of the the traditional owners image the mural that I showed you first up. All of the images in this presentation are mine unless otherwise attributed, and I do use images a lot in my presentations, and images that I've encountered that are part of my experience, and I think that's also important. So all things that you're very, very well aware of, but I think just timely to remind ourselves that climate change is very much associated with the health threat. And indeed, again, the Lancet saying it's the biggest global health threat of the 21st century. So now I'm going to give you a quick overview, because I mean, it's hard to sort of, you know, synthesize many years of work, but also material that I present, you know, in a whole course into a sort of a 30-40 minute talk. But I just want to give you a flavor of the sorts of ideas and themes that we are looking at in healthy built environments as planners. So it's very much about this notion of placemaking, and it's how do we make places that support people being healthy and that support a healthy planet as well. Here's a definition of a healthy built environment, and I often say this is the teacher in me. I think it's important just to pause and think about, well, what does this mean? Well, it is a place, a physical place that's planned, as in urban planning. It's design, so picking up all of the design professions that I work with in the built environment. It's a place that's then managed and maintained, so it's not something that we just sort of plonk down in an environment and then forget about it. It's that ongoing management and maintenance that's really, really important to ensure that that we are creating a healthy built environment. And it's also about enabling all people, thinking about equitable access across the life course, people from low, medium, high socioeconomic status, and so on. So it's very much about an equitable access to a healthy built environment. And it's about places where people live, where they work, where they spend time, and indeed the places that they travel through. How can we make those health supportive in terms of ensuring that people can undertake health supportive behaviours, and especially those that address risk factors for chronic disease? And that, as I've already said, is very, very much around physical activity, being physically active, but that's not the only thing. And this is also, in the final aspect of my definition, it's about how we live every day. It's not the added on extras, it's what we do every day. It's what's in our ordinary everyday environment that is just so important. And I emphasize too that notion of this is across the life course. We had a program in the City, City Futures Research Centre. This is some time ago, and it was a major piece of work that was first time funded by New South Wales Health, funding a built environment faculty, urban planners, and we did a lot of work over. It was a 5-year program, a lot of education, advocacy, as well as research. And one of the things that came out of the work, we came up with this notion of the domains of the built environment influence on health. These domains being where planning, urban planning, and the built environment professions more broadly can have the most impact in supporting health and addressing the risk factors for chronic disease. And these are the 3 domains: getting people active, getting the built environment to connect and strengthen communities, and the built environment and providing healthy food options. And those 3 domains fit quite nicely with those major risk factors for chronic disease. Of course, these domains are very interlinked and cross over constantly, but they've been a very, very useful organising framework for much of the work that we've done in healthy built environments. So I'm just going to give you some examples now of how these three domains actually were or can be activated, and many of these things I'm sure are quite obvious, and hopefully areas that you're already working in and will no doubt have some interesting examples of how you're already contributing and maybe thinking about other ways that you can reach out and further contribute. So how can the built environment encourage people's physical activity? Well, we have to ensure that it's a safe environment for everyone, but particularly for children and particularly for older people, people with disabilities. Safety is absolutely fundamental to a healthy built environment. And if people don't perceive their environment to be safe, they're not going to go out and be physically active in it. They're not going to go out and connect with each other in it or do any other sorts of activities. Design is really, really important, and designing environments that make it fun, invite people to be physically active in their environment. In this case, this is in the north of Queensland, a hot environment pretty much all year around. The environment around water play designed to get kids active. Sun protection is enormously important across Australia. We have very high rates of skin cancer. If we aren't shading our playgrounds in this sort of way, again, parents won't allow their children to go and play in a playground that's not shaded for obvious reasons. And that's been a very big push for ensuring that environments, particularly those provided for young children, are safe and are health supportive, the whole issue of shade. Providing, things like outdoor gyms, and these actually aren't shaded, and perhaps the question should be, well, should they be? Probably they should be. But a lot of outdoor gym equipment, and I'm sure you'd know many, many examples of this, encouraging people to get active. So many of these examples are very much about getting people active for leisure. And we know that if we can maintain good set of connected footpaths, bike paths, connected to open spaces, that encourages physical activity. We also know how important it is to provide these sort of active leisure places close to where people live. And this is now very much on the radar of developers, also urban planners, and much of our high density developments that we're seeing around Australia, most of our cities, and indeed in some regional areas. It's very, very important to provide adequate adequate open space to ensure that people have opportunities for being physically active close by. But perhaps an area that you're, perhaps more familiar with, but it's also a very, very critical aspect of getting people active is how do we get people active for transport? And again, this is the use of transport on a day-to-day basis. A lot of this is around cycling, and in some countries, and I just want to share a few images here of a European city, Freiburg, which is in the south of Germany, where cycling is and has been for a long time a way of life. It's something that everyone does readily. And in fact, the physical infrastructure is very, very strong here. It's been, as in many other European cities, a strong policy focus to ensure that cycling and walking are privileged, are provided for in good physical infrastructure. something that we're still grappling with in Australia. This is the Freiburg cycling highway, which I thought was fantastic. And as I said, it's across the life course. You see all sorts of people out and about on these cycles. This is a cycling parking station, the whole aspect of it for cycles looks like that on the inside, and this is close by to the city centre, the train station, and other public transport options. And being connected to public transport is also a key intervention in terms of getting people active, because obviously, if you are getting around on public transport, then you're going to be either walking to the tram stop, the train station, the bus stop, or riding your bike, and the same when you get to your final destination. So there is a lot more physical activity involved in those journeys on public transport. And the connectivity is very important in ensuring that it's easy for people to get to use public transport and easy using active modes of transport. I'm going to just move very quickly now. I'm conscious that my time's getting on, but I want to now talk about the second domain, which is providing access to healthy foods. And I often, oh, whoops, sorry, did that. I just went off my full screen mode. Yeah, a really important aspect of a healthy built environment, and one that you might be surprised at the involvement of people in these sorts of things. But it's not just about, gardens and farmers markets. It's also about having really good nearby supermarkets where we can buy good, fresh produce that is well priced and readily available. So we've certainly been thinking a lot about ensuring that there is places for people to set up farmers markets, and many of you are no doubt familiar with these and go to farmers markets on a regular basis. And for many people, this is about celebrating the seasonality of our food. It's also about connecting with growers, talking about how do you cook that particular food. And there's more and more emphasis, perhaps not always in farmers markets, but just broadly about the advantages of a plant-based diet, less meat in the diet, and that then has a link with climate, well, not so, yeah, climate change, but also planetary health more broadly. Community gardens are an amazing way to get people out being physically active, certainly giving them access to healthy foods, but also providing that really important social connection. I often say to people that community gardens have multiple benefits in terms of a healthy built environment. And it's interesting to see that these are being increasingly included as part of private developments. So sometimes that might be part of the open space around a medium to high density development, housing development. This is an example over in New Zealand, in Auckland, part of that particular development on the foreshores of Auckland. This is also very much the case in schools, where there's a thing called the School Kitchen Gardens movement. This is right across Australia, and it's been championed by some of our celebrity chefs, partly to get children excited about growing their own food, but also to get education modules up and running to teach children good nutrition, but also basic cooking skills. So ways to cook the sort of healthy foods out of gardens, and there's been enormous success in these sorts of programs. Also, you might be aware, you might be involved in something like this yourself, is the provision of what we call edible urban environments, trying to create gardens in local streets where people can come together as a community and neighbourhood, making the streets safer. There's lots of interesting examples, and that little YouTube video down there, you might like to have a look at that at some stage. It's a very nice example of a local community that's come together through the provision of the edible urban environment out the front, growing food and bringing people together. The final domain is about the importance of places in connecting communities and bringing people together. We've heard a lot about this, really, I think, during COVID, and I think it's rather unfortunate that we talk about social distancing, whereas what we're really talking about is physical distancing. And there's been such an emphasis on the importance of really great public places that enable us to be sufficiently physically distanced from each other while we socially connect. So we can still be physically distanced, but we can socially connect, and that's so important. These sorts of spaces can celebrate a local area's history. They can often involve local groups in the creation of these places. And they're also, very importantly, places that have infrastructure, simple infrastructure that often gets forgotten, so that people can come out into an open space, can come out of their homes and feel less socially isolated, as long as there are the amenities that support them. A simple seat with a back, with the sides of the seat there to enable a comfortable seating arrangement. Other sorts of infrastructure, I've already mentioned shading, very important. Thinking about getting out and about, public toilets. We often don't talk about them, but they are so important, and they need to be provided in places to encourage people to get out and about. So too, water, what we call bubblers or water fountains, something that is really critical in a hot climate like Australia. And I just thought I'd share you the bike repair station, which is something that has just been put up in a big open space area in the inner west in Sydney. A little sort of pole with all sorts of equipment, tools for people to do a few running repairs on their bikes when they're out and about. So these sorts of amenities are really important. Other things that encourage people to get out and be in, to connect with each other, that provide opportunities for those incidental connections, are things like street libraries, where people can donate books, but they also find books for themselves. And I don't know what your experience of street libraries is, but mine is that they are just chock-a-block of all sorts of books. They're constantly changing, and I've had really great, lovely conversations with people that I've just met at the street library. The same with connections over really interesting street and landscape public art. You might stop, talk about what the artwork might represent, but it makes for an interesting conversation point. Again, bringing people together and enhancing the environments that they're in. Another real favourite of mine is the dog park, a place where there can be a lot of interaction, a lot of fun, and really more and more important in our densifying urban environments to ensure that people can still have dogs, And there's a whole raft of research on the importance of pets for people's health, companion animals. But of course, dogs have to be exercised. And if you don't have your own private backyard, then you've got to have your dog out and about. And I think it's also important that these dog parks are well connected by walking paths close to where people live, so that people aren't jumping in their cars with their dogs to drive them to the dog park, but they're actually walking the dog to the dog park and then walking around the dog park. So it's a win-win for physical activity for both dogs and their owners. And green open space is so important in the provision of public spaces more broadly. And, you know, there's a raft of benefits for the planet in terms of urban cooling, provision of biodiversity, so on and so on. But of course, really important for us as human beings, for both just our physical health, but also our psychological health, and the importance of the restorative nature of green open spaces. The way that being in a green open space can help to reduce our overactive mind and being overstimulated by the urban environment that many of us, most of us, are constantly in, and the barrage of stimulation that we experience in those urban environments. Going into a green environment can calm that. And even just looking at those pictures, I particularly love the one on the left. That's in a rural New South Wales location. And actually the one on the right is in Hyde Park in London, an image I took quite some years ago. But just looking at those images, and I hope you can feel it too, there's a sense of calmness, and it sort of relaxes you. And there's some really good research that indicates that this is certainly the case. Just also, and I'm just going to touch on this, I don't have time to go into it now, but the sorts of initiatives that I've talked about for people's health are also good for planetary health, getting people out of their cars, reducing greenhouse gas emissions, etc., etc. So essentially, a low carbon environment is a healthy environment for both people and planet. But then there are these issues to do with equities. This is just an infographic just to sort of highlight again the importance of the work being done by the Lancet, but just sort of showing the interconnections between planetary and people health, and action on both it brings about co-benefits for both. So the work that we're doing to help people's health inevitably will assist in the planet's health. So finally, I want to talk about a few perhaps opportunities and challenges posed by some of the work in healthy built environments. There certainly is a lot of emphasis on us living closer in higher density developments, so that we have less need to use cars, so that our work and home is much closer. But of course, there can be challenges in terms of close living, people feeling perhaps their personal autonomy is somewhat challenged at times. And then there's been a lot of discussion about pet ownership, strata title rules and things like that. So certainly still some challenges around that. Many challenges to develop a sharing culture. We've no doubt encountered issues like this, being out and about, walking, and then sharing that environment with different users sometimes can lead to conflict. I'll be interested to hear what you think about that. But we've got to do more of this sharing, and we've got to imbue that culture, as well as having the necessary physical infrastructure to enable us to share using infrastructure that but we've got to be able to be more mindful of more people wanting to do different things. And of course, car share is a great way there to also do that. There's challenges as we focus more on public space, given that we are living more and more in apartments with less access to private space. So how do we deal with ensuring that public spaces are that, not just pseudo public spaces in private ownership, and that you can only get access to those spaces through paying for them, such as using cafes and so on. So there's a few challenges there. I've already said quite a bit about this, the importance of public green open space, and as we densify our environments, that only becomes more and more important, and a continuing challenge. The political rhetoric is right on this, but the actualization of it isn't necessarily occurring. And I think also there's challenges, there's opportunities, sometimes conflicts around using spaces differently, how we perhaps use our streets differently, how we might use our green spaces differently. And then there can be challenges in multiple users, again, wanting to use green space in different ways. Another interesting thing that's happening is that we're, I think, refocusing on regional development, and this has certainly occurred through COVID, as people have been able to work from home with the technology enabling that to happen. Then people are going out, living in rural, regional areas, and still being able to be part of the global economy. So this is a challenge, especially in terms of retaining our agricultural land, if it's been gobbled up for housing, but it's also a great opportunity for our regional and rural areas. So last two slides probably would, I think, more than bring me up to time. Just thinking about some positives and opportunities post-COVID-19. I think a real positive is that our governments, our decision makers, have responded to the evidence on COVID. They've responded in a really timely way. And I think we have to use this, this as an example for other evidence. They've got to be responding to other evidence, and I think this is particularly so around climate change, but also around chronic non-communicable diseases, much longer term, but there's so much evidence suggesting that we have to be doing the sorts of things that I'm suggesting in terms of creating a health supportive environment. COVID has simply reinforced supportive placemaking principles around health. So that's something that we have to be mindful of and continue. Again, the critical role of green spaces has also been reinforced through what we've experienced with COVID. Working from home is going to be more the norm, certainly for part of the week, and this is going to place a greater focus on the provision of health supportive and vibrant local spaces, and as I've said, more opportunities for placemaking in regional areas. I think we also just have to caution against a knee-jerk reaction for change, and we may need to be mindful of inequities and whether they will be exacerbated by certain actions. And this has also come through 2020 as we've navigated the challenges of COVID. Our CBDs are going to change, they are changing, and that has enormous implications for placemaking, let alone other implications for the broader economy and the way that we work, and inevitably the way that we travel. And I think, unfortunately, there's certainly still a way to go to get people back to being comfortable about using public transport, particularly with the concerns about the virus transmission. Hopefully, with the rollout of the vaccine, that is going to change. And the good about that is that, perhaps there will be more cycling and more walking if people aren't using public transport. And we've seen some great examples of pop-up cycleways. But the bad is that there could well be more cars on the roads. And there certainly have been. So that sort of wraps it up. And I just wanted to end on that slide, which I took, I guess, at the height of the lockdown, a little over 12, well, no, less than 12 months ago, but just standing outside my house on an evening, looking at the beautiful sunset, but thinking about certainly challenges, but the promise of opportunities with the dawning of a new day tomorrow, looking at that as a day ends, and hoping that we're going to come out of the great challenges that we've experienced through the global pandemic with a reinvigorated understanding of the health supportive implications of place and how we can use place to really support people's physical and mental health. And it's pretty exciting to be part of that journey. So thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much, Susan, for the very interesting presentation. Now I would like to open the session for answer and questions. I also would like to invite our audience to open their mics if they are interested to have interactive discussion around the topic. So first question is from Michael. Michael, thank you for your question. Would you like to open your mic and ask your questions, or you prefer me to read? Okay, yeah.
Hi, Marsan, and thank you so much for that talk, Susan. It's not a perspective that we hear very often. The question was a little bit tongue-in-cheek, but you told us that you've been reading The Lancet. I just wondered whether there are any planning publications that you would recommend health and medical researchers to read.
Oh, well, thank you for that. Actually, that's a wonderful question. Well, I could just maybe while the next question's coming up, I could just gather a few books from just over there. It's not wallpaper. It is actually a real bookshelf. Somebody asked me that on a Zoom once, was that wallpaper? But yes, I mean, I could certainly recommend many books, and I've been fortunate enough, right place, right time, to be involved in some of them. I've just, not last year, the year before, 2019, Healthy Built Environments for Australia came out, jointly authored with my a colleague over at Sydney University, Dr. Jennifer Kent. I could actually, Marsan, maybe I could send a list of references to you. I'd be more than happy to do that, and I'd be delighted to share, some resources. One, I often do that in talks, but I just thought that might have been taken too much time. Another thing, perhaps you might be interested to have a look at my City Wellbeing website, and I can share the links with this in just perhaps a one-page reference list that I can send. I have been for the last 11 years doing a regular column in the Planning Institute of Australia's journal New Planner, which is for planners in New South Wales. And that's just been a short column raising awareness about healthy built environments. And I've got every one of those columns for 11 years up on my website. So there's quite a few. It's with a quarterly column, and that might just give you some nice short little snippets of different aspects of healthy built environments. But there's quite a few texts. There's a nice reader that I was involved with, I think it's 2015, one of the Routledge Reader series with Hugh Barton. He led that particular book, but we were joint editors on that. So that's more of a global perspective, and certainly a lot of transport in that one as well. And of course, there's many texts on transport issues to do with active transport, walking, and so on. But I'd be delighted to send a little list to you.
Thanks very much, Marcel. I'm happy to let somebody else ask a question.
Yeah, thank you, Michael, and thank you, Susan. Okay, the next question is from Glenn. Glenn, would you like to open your mic to ask your question?
Yeah, sure. Thank you. And thank you, Susan, for the very interesting presentation.
Thank you.
This is very much the area that I work in. I'm a research fellow at RMIT University. And sometimes my question is around whether active transport is actually taken seriously in Australia as a mode of transport, because sometimes it comes across that it's very much seen as a recreational activity. And this generates conflict because road users very much dislike cyclists taking the roads on the weekends, and then that has a negative impact on those who actually commute for transport. But going back to the question, I wonder, is active transport taken seriously as a real mode of transport?
Look, it's a really important question, Belen, and I just sort of remind you that we've just embarked in Australia on the biggest road building project of our history, and we're privileging car use over and above active transport all the time. And I mean, I think culturally we haven't taken active transport seriously, and also in the provision of physical infrastructure. I mean, the amount of money that we spend on active transport is a drop in the ocean compared to these massive road building projects. I think, there's some really, well, not think, I know there are some really, really good people working in active transport. Certainly, I know them in New South Wales, and my colleague, Professor Chris Pettit, who now leads the City Futures Research Centre, has been working in that area for a long time. There's, a lot of good work being done, but until politicians really take that seriously, and we've had an enormous battle around just cultural acceptance of cyclists. There's been some appalling examples of disgusting behaviour of road users against cyclists. And unfortunately, I've also encountered, I'm not a cyclist, but I'm an avid walker, and there's some way to go still in a cultural acceptance of walking and cycling and that whole sharing. So, I think, yes, we have got a long way to go. I guess it's good if people do feel that they can get out and use, say, bikes and walking as part of their leisure, but we've got to absolutely take that a lot further in terms of getting this embedded as a way of getting to and from work and getting around, using it as your daily transport. I think it's also interesting just to sort of point out that many of the European cities where active transport has been accepted and it's just part and parcel of everyday living, those European cities have had policies in place for many, many years that have ensured the infrastructure is there, and through that the culture, I suppose, cultural acceptance has followed. So it has to be both of those things, and we've got a long way to go.
Thank you.
Thank you for your question. And the next question is from Vicky. Vicky, would you like to open your mic and ask your question?
Thank you, Susan, for a very engaging and fascinating presentation.
Thank you, Vicky.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I was wondering if there is any evidence regarding the impact of having 3 generations, that is grandparents, parents and children, living in the one place on their overall health.
Well, that's a fabulous question, and I wonder, was that motivated by the Q&A program last night?
No, it wasn't. I come from a Greek background, and
yeah,
in Greece, you have the grandparents living downstairs with the children living upstairs with their children, and everybody seems to be pretty healthy.
Yes, well, there's also the whole Mediterranean diet. That could be something there. Vicky, that is a fascinating question to which I don't have an answer, but I tell you what, I'm intrigued and I'll be certainly having a look around. But it did come up last night. It was a very poignant program on ABC around the imminent release of the Royal Commission into Aged Care. And there was a young man in the audience who asked a question about that very thing, about living with 3 generations in a household and how positive that was
wow.
in his experience in terms of the very positive aging of his grandparents. So
Okay.
yeah, and
That's incredible.
yeah, no, it really, and I mean, I have personal as well as professional interests in the whole aged care issue, and indeed probably as we all should, because what we're talking about here is wanting all of us to live a long, healthy life. We don't, none of us aim to go into aged care, but unfortunately, some of us will end up in aged care, and we want that to be the best possible environment for us. But yeah, it is very interesting, and I often maybe this is not evidence, but a personal reflection here, and indeed it was reflected on some of the communication, you know, on the tweets on Q&A.
All right.
I often think how hidden our aged people are, and how little, you know, awareness, unless, you know, we have an aged parent in care or with us, that we don't see older people out and about. I have a 94-year-old mother, and I'll take her out in a wheelchair sometimes, and we have really lovely interactions with people just, you know, in the local community. But you know, we don't often see other people out and about, older people, really frail aged people. And so I think, you know, your question is such an important one. And yeah, so I'll have a look out for that, Vicky. And if you find some evidence, I'd love to hear it too.
Okay,
because,
I will.
Yeah,
okay. Thank you so much.
Great question.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. The other question is from Christine. Christine, would you like to open your mic?
Hi, Susan. Thanks for that talk. It was really good. Yeah, look, I posed my question before you actually answered the one on cycling infrastructure. And I guess what I'm interested in is how best to influence policymakers planning policymakers in making better planning decisions to support these healthy environments. And I mean, you mentioned that, you know, we're going in Sydney, we're going ahead with another huge motorway project, which I believe doesn't have any aspect of public transport in it. And I've, even though I did my PhD on traffic-related air pollution around a new motorway, the Lane Cove Tunnel, I've actually stopped looking at EISs for tunnel projects and major motorways because I just feel that, well, number one, there's a lot of time that you need to actually look at these EISs, and then I don't feel like any comments are taken seriously. But even on a much smaller scale, how do we get better planning decisions made? Is it better to work with local government, for instance?
Well, I suppose all I can sort of say is there's a lot of planners out there who get this. And I've certainly been doing a lot over, you know, not quite 20 years now, but for many years teaching courses in this sort of healthy built environments. So a lot of urban planners, but also built environment professionals, architects, landscape architects. Health is now seen as central to what they are doing. I think we still are battling perhaps at a higher level, where the decisions are made at the political level, and the lobbying of very, very powerful groups who still have sway at that decision-making level around road building and coal mines and so on. And I'm sad to hear what you said about the comments and the time taken to make comments, and I think that's absolutely true, and that's the case pretty much now with any sort of planning document, planning proposal. It does take a long time, and often people do feel that they might have been listened to, but they really haven't been. It really hasn't made a difference that the decision's gone ahead. But yeah, I think we are making a difference. I've worked a lot with different stakeholders in this area across health and the built environment. We've lobbied for legislative change, and that has happened. We now see health as part of metropolitan strategies. We see it in some state jurisdictions as part of their planning legislation at the state level, not specifically at New South Wales, and there's a long story behind that. But yeah, so I am hopeful. There's a lot of professionals out there who get it, who are arguing for it, and change is happening, but it's perhaps a bit slower than we'd like.
So we just keep chipping away.
Absolutely, and keep on keeping on. And sometimes you think, oh, it's it's hopeless, but it's not. We've all got to keep on keeping on, and I think particularly reminding decision makers of the importance of evidence, and look at how responsive they were on COVID. We've got to be responsive on evidence about all of this as well.
Thanks.
So keep up the good fight. Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Christine. Well, thank you very much, Susan, for your great presentation. It was a great pleasure for us to have you here today. And I would like to thank you everyone for attending this seminar and for their interactive discussions. So I would like to end the session and say goodbye to everyone, and thanks for being here.
Well, thank you very much, and some really great questions. And I will come back with a list of references and resources for you.
That would be great.
Thank
you.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye. All the very
Thank you.
best. Bye. Bye. Bye, my son.
Bye. Thank you.
Yeah. Bye.